Well, hello, and welcome to another episode of the Imperfect Men's Club podcast. My name is Mark Aylward, and as always, I'm here with my good friend, colleague, and co-host Jim Gurley. We had a good but relatively brief pregame for us. We usually go for a half an hour, but I think in 15 minutes we got each other laughing about. And the topic in general is the relationships that we have with women as men. We're talking about them in the context of our own to some extent, and then kind of spread our wings a little about, other male female relationships. Not necessarily in middle age, but that's where we are. So there's probably a lot of middle age stuff there. But contextually, I think this plays out to younger people and older people. And then from a current events standpoint, it was a couple of days ago. Both of us, Jim brought it up, but both of us watched the interview that the former New England Patriots coach Bill Belichick, with a bunch of Super Bowl rings, who was idolized in that role, has fallen from grace. At least in my mind, the interview was of him and his relationship with his new 24-year-old girlfriend. And Jim, I'll throw it back to you so that you can bring it back into the wheel, because to me, a lot of this stems from just general self-awareness, and then the wheel, the relationship spoke, and then one level out, men and women, and we're going to go with the relationship that men have with women and see where it goes. So Jim, mike's over to you.
Yeah. Again, Mark, as always, I always appreciate our framework that we've created because it always seems to dial in, and that's what we refer to it as. And I'll go over that briefly, and then we'll come right back to our topic for today. But yeah, for those of you that don't know about our framework, or what we call the wheel of life, it's these five parts in our these five areas of our life that are going on, whether we realize or not, are going to affect the others. So it's like everything; it's alignment and balance, and it starts with no particular order. Our health, mental health, physical health. Um, then we have another layer that goes out to emotions, thoughts, exercise, nutrition, and so on. Another one is profession. As a man, that's very much our identity, and that's whether you're an entrepreneur or work for a company as an employee. And our relationship with the worldview, politics, very often related to conservative, liberal, or our childhood, and then our relationship with money, abundance, scarcity, and again. So, but today is something that I don't think we've actually talked about it yet, and it's something that is just in every one of our lives. And that's relationship with others, and others we put into two categories, and the difference between our relationship with women and our relationship with men. So, women obviously being our mother, our sisters, our aunts, our daughters, our, of course, girlfriends, and then mostly wife or significant others, and and then from there that branches out to the different friends and things like that. And as far as our men, it's our father, it's our uncles, it's our neighbors, our coaches, brothers, friends, and so on. But today we're going to talk about our relationships with women because they changed, and we also I think I referred to this before. I believe we live life in increments of 5 or 10, right? So 0 to 5, 0 to 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, 40, and now as we get here, at least both of us, in this increment of our 60s, it our relationship with women changes for a number of reasons. One, we don't have the drive, sexual drive. So the motive that we once had, maybe when we were 20 or 30 for sure. But also the relationship, or how a relationship changed in general. So when we saw this Bill Belichick interview, I think it made a lot of us uh, think of things, and every week when we talk, it always starts with self-awareness, and the center of this framework that we've created is self, and the number one thing is self-awareness, and then there's all kinds of other selves, right? So self uh, confidence, self, and it's just endless amount of selves. But the one thing that I first thought of when I saw the Bill Belichick interview uh, was how he was not self-aware. He in my opinion, was so I don't know. Let's break it down, Mark. Like I said, there's so many places we can go with this. It can be funny. It could be sad. It could be envy. I don't really envy him that much, but
No, any envy that I might have had for him was CBS took that away from me a couple days ago.
well, let's start off like what you said. Let's start off with the shirt. The shirt that he was.
Well, let me come back to that real quick, if I may,
Okay.
Jim, because I want to go back to the origination of this discussion. And at the risk
Yeah.
of, one of the things that we try not to do is to embarrass anybody that's in our life, and I don't have any intention of doing that. However, some of the best stories are our personal stories. So there's
Of
this
course.
balance between violating someone's confidence or offending someone and being authentic. And I don't know where the balance is. And I'm not asking you, Jim, to risk anything at all, but I'm going to take a little bit of a risk here because I think it's totally genuine and it's completely out of love and self-awareness. And so, and I'm not worried about it being misinterpreted. Should anyone hear it, my girlfriend, my kids, anybody. But I spent more time at my girlfriend's the last couple of weeks than I ever have. We have our own homes, and it's usually a weekend thing, and it's usually 2 or 3 days max, and then we go back to our respective Monday through Fridays. And a couple of our friends have joked about the fact that it probably is one of the reasons we get along so well is because we have our own homes. And as funny as that might sound, it's absolutely 100% true, I'm sure.
Yeah, no
So
question.
this time
Having a
around,
separate environment.
separate environment, space, yeah,
Good.
alone time, solitude, all kinds of things that you don't get when someone else is around. But I had expressed to Jim a couple of interesting frustrations that were creeping up, and I couldn't put my finger on whether that was just that we've been around together for a while, which is part of it, I'm sure. Getting older, which is part of it, I'm sure. But being in close proximity for an extended period of time for the first time was also a big part of it. And we joked about that.
No
And then,
question.
the topics come up like what happens as we age when it comes to our relationship with a woman, whether it's a girlfriend or a wife. And I want to keep it on the romantic relationship because the presence of sexual interaction changes the relationship entirely. So the daughters and girlfriends or aunts and nieces, different platonic stuff is not what we're talking about. We're talking about
Right.
that romantic relationship because it's unique in its
Yep.
in its sexual component, which
Yep.
changes in my experience changes the entire relationship. So
Like you said, no question. But yeah, today we're going to talk about the dynamics between what I don't know what you call them, a partner, a lover, or marriage.
yeah, I think it's
Whatever. But like you
your
said, it's
romantic partner. In our case,
yeah,
men, we're men and they're women.
yeah.
And but I just thought it started a conversation that became pretty funny, pretty interesting, very personal. And I shared with you my impression, Jim, that I don't know any guy that wouldn't listen to a little bit of this and go, oh, fucking hey man, I want to jump into that conversation.
Well, jump in if not, just get a perspective. Well, let me
Yeah, at
start off
least
by
throw
this. So,
throw a
as I
top.
said, this is kind of the benefit of having different lives, right? Because you've been through this before. You've gone through a divorce and that, so you have appreciation. You always have very nice things to say about your relationship, and so on. So again, it's not a negative
No.
context by any means, right? And then here I am going on my 35th wedding anniversary together for 40 years and without separate environments. So I think we have a pretty good balance of thoughts or situations in terms of sharing that. But let me start off with this kind of just to, and I say this openly to everybody, including my wife. I don't believe we were meant to be together forever. I don't. In fact, I think the just the contract of a marriage, let's just use that for example, should be like every other license. When you get a marriage license, it's automatically forever with no terms and conditions. But every other license, that you have, whether it's let's just start off with a driver's license, you have to get a test and retake every 5 years. You have to get an updated photo. You agree to some terms and conditions in
Yeah.
exchange for this license, but it's not forever and it's not auto renewable, right?
Yeah. Right.
Why
Right.
is it that marriage is like that? And so, and what I'm referring to is we should have an opt out and the ability to say, okay, after 5 years, we can renegotiate, but you have to renegotiate and maybe get on the same page, or have some change the terms and conditions, because life changes at different stages, whether you're having children or so on and so on. So yeah, so full disclosure, I talk about this openly. A
Yeah.
marriage license, in my opinion, needs to be, and it could apply to relationships, right? It doesn't have to be marriage license, but if you're with somebody, you should have the ability to reevaluate the let's say intentions, or because the original reason that you started the relationship is going to change and evolve over time. And if you don't revisit it, which is just called good communication, right? That's where relationships end, because people stop communicating. And
Yes.
that's I think the number one reason, and the number one reason that marriage is in no particular order, but I know it's sex is number one or two, and money, and
Yep.
then of course communication. So
Yeah, yeah, I think I'm glad you brought up communication, because in the absence of communication, relationships are impossible.
yeah.
No matter what the topics are, but I think to circle back, and I appreciate you bringing up the contract component of it. You brought that up before, and I don't necessarily disagree. I have this Catholic background that adds a different a component to that contract for life, for better or for worse. It's a sacrament, not just a
No, I'm glad you
contract.
mentioned it, because being Catholic, my wife being Catholic, that's
Yeah.
what I'm saying. The default, that's how we were brought up. That's our part of
Yeah.
who we are and how we think of it.
Yeah. So
But
it's more than a contract when you throw that variable in there.
thank
Doesn't
you. I
change
agree.
the reality that, renewing. That's why people renew their vows, I'm sure. It's another form
Yeah,
of that,
sure.
And so, but this was interesting because, I was faced with a couple of things that began to frustrate me, and they were around communication. There was the listening component, the talking component, how close in proximity we were to one another. When one of us was talking to I couldn't hear, I didn't hear what she said. What did you say? I misinterpreted what you said. I took offense to it because you didn't say that. You said something else. And I was like, should I address this, or should I just kind of like be a little more grateful, a little more tolerant, and understand that I'm contributing 50% to this situation? So I got to own this. And by no means, and I told you before, Jim, this is not a big deal. It was more of a humorous observation that was thrust upon me by the fact, I think, that we've been together for 6 years. Number two, this was the first time we'd ever spent like 6, 7 days in a row in the same house. And so I could be proven wrong that was the reason, but I don't think so. And then fast forward to this Bill Belichick interview. Oh my God. I was saddened by that. That's what I left with. I was saddened by that. But to see this guy, for anyone who doesn't know him, before this interview, maybe not after, but before, was going to go down as perhaps the best professional football coach, if not football coach, of all time. Like almost without question. Very few people in competition with that. And now all I see is a sad old man with no self-awareness, to your point. And it was
Is he a settled man? Again, let's break this down. I see it a little differently. I see it as, and we've talked about this before. Let's face it, he's at a stage in his life where he has plenty of money. He never has to work again. I'm pretty sure he was married most of his professional life, right?
He was married and had kids. I don't know for how long. I know he's divorced.
Yeah. Right. But he's achieved, every thing that anybody could ever wish or hope in terms of a professional football coach. But it's either a narcissist or he is so addicted to the attention that he's not right. And I've seen this before. It's because it's, again, it has to be about his ego. He is, and that's
well, you do swim in professional athlete circles, and I don't, and so I'm sure you have.
I'm speaking on kind of firsthand experience, firsthand observation, I should say, and it is remarkable. it's funny. That's in fairness to this conversation, because somebody gave it right back to me. I started going on this rant, kind of the same thing, like, wow, they don't need the money. Why do they need to keep doing that? Why, well, because that's who they are, right? And then somebody said, well, that applies to you too. And then of course I went, oh no, not me. I'm different, right? So I'd be a complete hypocrite if I didn't do some of the same thing. So I want to be,
Well,
self-aware.
but that also makes you self-aware. I can't imagine Bill Belichick admitting that,
Well,
right?
well, that's exactly, I think, what was made this so fascinating. I don't
Hmm.
typically like to talk about others, but this is a reflection on, maybe we see a little bit of ourselves in him, right? Because let's face
I
it,
think
everybody
when
thinks
yeah,
that you would want to have a 24-year-old girlfriend. You just told me his age. I could not believe that it was a 50-year age difference. I think that was the headline, right?
I'm pretty sure I would not bet my life on it, but I'm pretty sure I heard 77 or 78. I know he's not. He's 70. He's not quite 80, and he's 70
Yeah.
something.
Mark, I don't know about you, but having a daughter, I just couldn't do it.
No way. No
It,
way. And a
there's
matter of
something not
fact,
right about
I
you.
don't think, the reason that I probably would, even if I was inclined to want to do it, the
Yeah,
reason I wouldn't get away with it is because my daughters wouldn't let me. They'd be like, "Are you fucking
absolutely.
kidding me, Dad? Are you serious right now?" I can hear him.
Yeah, and I don't know if he has daughters, but that's
He does.
he does. Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's that. It's also kind of sick because well, it's hard to know who was controlling that relationship. Based on that interview, it sounds like she was into his head as much as he was into hers. But there's no question that if you're that much older, uh, your 24-year-old girlfriend's got some serious daddy issues that are going to affect your life.
Yeah.
It's just
Yeah.
a matter of time.
Yeah.
This so
Well,
yeah,
I think you'd have to. I think you'd have to, Jim. Well, you wouldn't have to, but I think it would. If you were interested in delving deeper, I think you'd have to. You'd have to understand, what is she trying to get out of this relationship? What is he trying to get out of this relationship? I don't know if either one of them would ever volunteer that, and I don't know that anyone's interested enough to put in the time and energy. But it to me, along the lines of the topic of men and women and the relationships of men and women, there's a lot of nuance to that. And as soon as you throw in romance and sex, there's even more. And then what we're talking about is the evolution of that dynamic over an extended period of time, and whether that relationship should be expected to be forever or some shorter period of time to be revisited and readdressed and relicensed and retested or whatever, which is fascinating to me. But regardless of who you are, if you're not, I think, if you're not willing to step back and do some self-awareness work and take responsibility, at least to say, if there's a disconnect between us, this man and this woman, me being the man, my girlfriend being the woman, I have a responsibility to address that sooner than later, I think, with kindness, I think, with candor and kindness,
Mhm.
and then be prepared, I think, that the resolution is going to require some level of compromise. I think otherwise I'm being unrealistic. What do you think about that assessment?
Well, again, I'm going to tie this back to something. And again, for my old friends, they used to hear me. I used to have a lot of fun about this, but over the years, I've did kind of a deep dive and come up with this hypothesis. But I used to say, uh, well, women are crazy. We're all crazy. But as you and I know, calling a woman crazy that's the new C word. That is the worst thing you could do, is to
Mm-hmm.
call a woman crazy. That's just a trigger that makes them go nutso, right? And at first I used to laugh about it, and then I started to really think about it. There's something there, right? And so I want to start off by saying I've developed this very strong opinion of the importance of women, how they're such an important part of everything we do. They're the drivers of everything, and whether we're self-aware or understand that. And then I think as I started to educate myself more on why it is they are the way they are and why we're so different. It's evolutionary, right? This is very much part of human evolution. But it was this article that I read, and or actually it was an interview I listened to, and it was a gal was talking about the women's a woman's menstrual cycle and how much that is affects, of course, them, and then but it affects us. So, and the best example is about women. Let's just say that were part of the same fraternity at that age. Their periods would align. So a lot of what we're dealing with is they're changing, and this again, this is nature. So I'm saying this in the most respectful way, in that when a woman goes through different stages of her life, particularly during the childbearing years, they are changing, and we are reacting to that as men.
Mhm.
And that's why, remember sometimes when you're younger, you walk into a bar and you just get lucky and you get this girl just loves you. She just wants to F you. And wow, you thought you got lucky. You actually didn't get that lucky. It was the luck. It was related to her menstrual cycle. It was because they'll go from I want to be loved to I want to F to I want to talk about things. They're constantly changing. And I'm saying this in the most respectful way, because as a man, once we start to understand that more, and then even menopause, we'll get a much better idea of why they are the way they are. And let's face it, without them, everything would just be black and white, right? The whole economy is
Well,
driven
I,
on so much of what they are. So I
yeah,
want to frame this in the most like respectful way and understand that. And I'll share some other things I learned about women and why they are the way they are, and how we react to it as men is very important. But what were you saying?
I was going to say, I think all of that is, I think you could be accused of all of that being true. That doesn't mean it's going to be interpreted the way that you want it to be interpreted if you were to get into a conversation about that with your
Oh,
woman.
I would agree with you 100%. That's why
Yeah.
I'm very careful how I say this. I want to frame this in the most respectful way, because I think it's very helpful for a man. If I had one advice to a young man in his 20s or 30s, understand why they are the way they are. And then our job, that's the difference between a man and a boy, right? A man does what's right. A boy does what he's told.
Yeah.
And there's a big difference between the two. And our role and what they really want from us is not what they're telling us they want most of the time. It's
Not
something
certainly
else.
not all the time, and I think that one of the things that I think of, Jim, because this to me, it's we both use the word communication, right? So communication opens up relationships and it closes them down in moments,
Mm-hmm.
and the absence of it. And so I think the communication piece, like I remember, and this is not a judgment at all. It's actually just an observation. My older brother and his wife, they sat down and had multiple conversations about what it was going to be like to be married to one another. They didn't make demands, but they talked about what was important to them. They talked about everything you could imagine. Pick a category: sex, children, money, religion, worldview, whatever. And they set some expectations. And
Yep.
one of them I remember was, I'm going to be a fighter pilot. I am a fighter pilot. And that's a dangerous thing to be. And you have to be okay with the fact that you're going to probably think every once in a while, I wonder if he's going to come home alive. And that's whether you're a firefighter or a soldier or a police officer, or in this case, a fighter pilot. That's a big ask, right? That's a big ask. But if you have that conversation up front and you set the proper expectations, even when that conversation becomes horribly difficult, you can at least refer back to the fact that we did have a conversation about this. I don't expect you to like it, but I do expect you to accept it. And that's what you agreed to. And if the expectations in communication in a relationship are addressed properly, there's hope that when that difficult argument comes up, you can at least revert back to something that you both already discussed. I think a lot of us don't have that luxury. I never did. I didn't have those discussions. I don't know about you.
Yeah, I absolutely have. And you have to keep having them, right? It's not a
Yes.
one time. They have to be, as I mentioned earlier, everything is an agreement, an assumption, an understanding, and you have to revisit that to make sure that it reflects what's going on in your life at that time. That's just why I'm suggesting. I'm self-proclaimed expert in this. I'm not, but I do understand behaviors, and women act the way they do for a reason at different stages of their life. But again, ultimately they look at us to to be the strength, to be the consistency, to make the hard decisions. So once you understand those roles, back to your point, those understandings, I think your success of a relationship will be higher. I also think that there's the social construct, right? How things change and the roles. We've been, in my opinion, confusing women to believe they can have it all. Well, they can't have it all. Nobody can
No,
have.
we've been confusing men too, right?
We absolutely have. But
Yep.
for a woman to believe that she can uh, have 4 kids, have a career, have all these things. It's just not fair. It's not fair to them. And then you have this religious, which we talked about earlier. I think the hardest thing to be today or in America is a Catholic American woman, because you have very mixed messages being sent. One is be a whore, show your ass, show your tits. That's cool. That's what everybody does. And then you've got this thing, act like Virgin Mary. So they're confused. And
Yeah.
I'm speaking to my wife, my mother, my grandmother, and my sisters. So
Yeah, I remember my mom, God rest her soul, and my mom and dad split up. I think I told you when I was in my early 30s, mid 30s. So it wasn't any kind of devastation for me. I remember thinking to myself, I'm surprised it took this long. But I remember in no specific order, my mother expressing frustration way after the fact when she'd been divorced for years, that when she wanted to get an advanced degree in fine arts and become an artist, that my father was resistant to that because it would take her out of the home. And when I remember talking to my father about it years later, and he's like, I never had that conversation with her. I encouraged her to go get her a degree. I wanted her to be happy.
very different
And
version, huh?
isn't that fascinating?
Well,
Right?
yeah, it is, because again, everybody has their version. I used to play around. I'm a little more careful about it. I used to call it the vortex, because I do believe that the vortex. Have you heard the term?
Oh yeah.
You know what I'm referring to, right?
Uh-huh.
It is life. It the vortex, obviously, it brings everything, is really, and that's women being women. Everything is about, they are life. They create life. It's also something I often play around with. That we spend the first 9 months of our life trying to get out. We spend the rest of our life trying to get back in.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
It, and
Well,
that describes the vortex, and how there's this current, there's this vortex that's bringing things in, and it'll take houses, it'll take lives, it'll take cars. It does. It's endless, right? And it just
yeah,
brings things
I've
in. So,
I've had quite a bit of experience with said vortex.
oh yes, you have, haven't you? And you've seen it take a house, a few cars, and
It's more powerful than Mother Nature, apparently.
that's my point, Mark. I'm trying so hard not to to get a hate mail on this one, but
No, no,
this
hey
is
man,
life experiences of.
well, if you take it back around to the Bill Belichick interview, it's like, I'm not a psychologist, you're not a psychologist, I'm not an expert at this. I don't think there is such a thing, and I don't profess to be giving anybody advice about anything, but I think this self-awareness thing that we always come back to is deserving of just a tad bit more attention right now. And I think that when I looked at Belichick, and I'm totally being presumptuous, I have no idea if this is true or not, to your point, I see a guy who misses the praise, and he doesn't get, there's a huge void created. And instead of recognizing that, whatever caused that, which is some childhood insecurity, I'm sure, of some kind that was never rationalized or dealt with, you're going to keep trying to fill that attention gap with the wrong shit. And I don't think you and I are any different. There might be a matter of degrees, but I think that as we get older, as we age, as our relationships with women change and evolve and mature and whatever, it's like, I have to get to a point, to me, for my own peace of mind, I have to go, all right, like when I was getting frustrated with my girlfriend over the weekend, I was thinking to myself, my first inclination was, what am I doing to cause this? It wasn't, oh my God, why are you doing this? I'm like, why do I feel a little bit annoyed by this? Am I not in control of that emotion? Why was it so easy for me to become a little bit frustrated? And I think if you do that, then you have hope for resolution. But if you don't do that and you automatically go outside to fill that void, there's no way to fill it. You can't fill it with a 24-year-old chick. There's no way.
Yeah. I have to say I've lost a tremendous amount of respect for him because he has taken advantage of her in a way that I don't think a man should, especially with that age difference.
Right? I think they're both taking advantage of each other, and I think it's disgusting.
But he should be the adult in the room, in my opinion. But anyway,
agreed.
I don't like to talk about other people. I
want
to share this one Vortex story with you because. Of course, I have to leave out names, but this goes back to years ago. You
don't have to, Jim. You want to.
No, but I can't say their name because it actually.
I'm teasing you.
Yeah, but anyway, it was two very, very good friends. We got together and one said, "Hey, this other friend, he's really having a hard time with his marriage and blah blah blah." Anyway. I got to say this in the right ways. So we got together, had a couple beers, and he says, why don't you come with me and see if we can help him, maybe talk him off the edge, right? Because could have cost him his marriage. So I said, hey, this is whatever his name is. Says, there's nothing wrong. Think of the vortex. I was explaining the vortex theory to him. I says, think of it like this. You're running along this perfectly level field, this grass. And you're running along and there's a pothole. Well, that's the vortex. You twist an ankle, no big deal, right? Just keep running. But then that vortex is there, but you don't run around the gopher hole. This time, you step in it again and it takes a leg. That's a sign that this vortex is this thing is bigger than you, right? This is the vortex. I said, so it's one thing to twist an ankle, lose a leg, but if you don't recognize that, you're going to lose a body and yourself. And then sure enough, he ended up getting a divorce and the rest is kind of history. But the example was this current, this vortex, this hole is going on. And as a man, you have to at least be somewhat self-aware that this is going on. And so it's not, you don't lose your best judgments, and you certainly don't want to lose a life that affects a lot of other people, because that's the spell that a woman has on a man. It's always been that way. It's more powerful than heroin or even drugs.
Well, I think there's just like there are men, I think there are women. Like, we have the ability to manipulate. We have the ability to coerce. We have the ability. I mean, I fancy myself as a very good communicator, but I don't manipulate people with that. I don't take advantage of that. And I think if you're a woman, if you're an attractive woman who's
the power that you possess,
who's sensuous and and intelligent, you have a responsibility. You can wield that as a manipulative bitch, or you can make some guy the luckiest man in the world. That's a choice.
It is. And women have much, much more control over the world than we do because of that. Another a woman friend years ago said this, and she was saying in the most respectful way. She was saying that men are dumb compared to women. Women are much smarter as far as the big picture things and things through. And there's a reason for that, right? They had to be a little more clever because they didn't have the physical strength, and this is evolutionary. But it is true. We're simple. We're happy with a beer, some food, and a blowjob. We're good, right? Women are much more complex, and this is why, going back to this, understanding their menstrual cycle and even menopause, how they change so much, and as a result, we don't change that much. We're still pretty basic. So it's good for anybody to of course respect women. It's so important. That's the one. Our job as a man is to, number one, protect them from others, but protect them from you, of taking advantage of them. What I see is Bill Belichick has taken advantage of that 24-year-old girl, basically.
Yeah. It's difficult for me to completely come over to your side on that one, because I saw her, and she was the epitome of manipulation. She was a control freak, And I'm one
Mark,
of the
she's a
guys.
kid. She's 24 years old.
I don't care, dude. I'm gonna play devil's advocate.
That's
I was
okay. Yeah.
24 once, and my kids were all 24 once, and they were smart as. And my point is, I think overall they both have responsibility for that thing, whatever's going on there. But you're right. I think as the older man, it's more his responsible than it is hers. I just don't. I guess I feel like not letting her just completely get away with it. So that which is
again, back to my position as a man is three. You protect them from um, other men taking advantage of them. That's our job as a man, physically or in any other way, even emotionally. You know, that's our role. That's our job. You protect them from yourself from not taking advantage, and then you protect them from themselves of this power or their emotions. And I don't know, it's just how I feel. And I think that the world would be a better place if we if the relationship between a man and woman was more of a dance than a competition. And
No, I think it's a great way to conclude. I think that I like to think about leaving people that might be listening with at least a takeaway of some kind. And I don't mean it to be presumptuous or to be giving advice or anything like that, but just an observation.
yeah,
It's very clear to me, particularly in this current state of political noisiness, that men and women are different. That's just it's just true.
Celebrate the differences.
We should celebrate the differences and not make so much of a stink about the fact that we're different, because the differences are, for the most part, absolute blessings, right? Like they couldn't live without us. We certainly couldn't live without them. I mean, they make people, right? Without them, we don't have no more people, And so, and the other thing is that, there's a thing called human nature, and this is at the core of our differences. And I think if we acknowledge them, we're better off than if we don't. And the final piece in that is what came in and out of this conversation, which is communication. If you can continue to communicate, particularly in a male-female romantic sexual relationship, you've got a really good chance of going into later on in life with a really good partner that you're comfortable with. If you stop communicating, I don't care who you are, you're fucked. You're dead. It's just a question of time. It's not a question of if anymore. It's a question of when. And I think that's what goes on in politics. We stop talking and everything shuts down. So
we're off topic now. Let's go. Let's end it on women. So good show, Mark. I think it was an important relationship.
It's
an important part of our lives. So.
And we'll talk about it again. Thanks for bringing it up, Jim.
Thank you.